Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Our 8th session here, Steps for Successful Secondary Transition Planning. And today we'll be talking about ongoing secondary transition process, including progress monitoring and assessment and a whole host of other little things that we're going to add in today to capture what has been going on with all of our webinar series. And we really have enjoyed presenting this webinar series to everyone. And as I said a few minutes ago, in case you didn't hear me, there are handouts in the handouts section. If you click over there, you will see the PowerPoint and a flyer for some another upcoming event that we will fill you in as we go along today. Okay. So, hi, I'm Diane Perry. I am a family resource specialist at the Peel Center. And I also wear that hat of a parent of a young man who went through special education. So I really enjoy doing these this webinar series so I can bring that personal story to our session as well. But as a family resource specialist at the Peel Center, you know, we provide a lot of individual support for families and navigating the special education system, understanding your rights and so forth. But at the Peel Center, we provide so much more. This graphic represents the 6 key strategies used by Peel to accomplish all the work that we do. Families and youth, as you can see, are at the center of our work, surrounded by the communities and the professionals who work with them. And then you can see around the outer circle is all of our services, which we provide: outreach, resources, individual assistance, which I just talked about that I do, training, which is also what we're doing here today, leadership development, and lots of partnerships across the state. And my partner today, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Diane, thank you. I'm Michael Storr, and I'm a Knowledge Development and Technical Assistance Specialist with the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the Collaborative, and I work at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, the Cato School of Education. You'll see on this slide that our other partners are listed there from the other universities that make up NTAC, the Collaborative. And NTAC is a federally funded project that supports state education and vocational rehabilitation agencies. So in Pennsylvania, that would be through our Bureau of Special Education, our LEAs across the state, and then through OVR. We also support and provide information for youth, families, and other secondary transition stakeholders in developing and implementing effective and evidence-based practices that help students transition from high school to meaningful and successful adult lives.
So today, participants will be able to discuss the secondary transition process elements and how it applies to the IEP. And if you are a repeat joiner of our webinar series here, you will know and understand that all of what we've been presenting over our webinar series, which is on our website. So we do encourage you to go to the Peel Center website and look at some of the other sessions that Michael and I have recorded for you to understand this whole transition process. And today we're also going to talk about, you know, the planning of that. We also will touch on the describing the topics aligned with the transition guide, discoveries guide, which was developed by collecting voices and experiences from youth, families, and stakeholders, and highlights the key elements that make a successful transition from high school to adult life. It is a collection of the indicators and sub-indicators that can be used as a roadmap to guide your transition plan. Because as a family member, I know how hard it is, that role and trying to figure out, what do I do in transition? What do I not do in transition? Things like that. So there's a lot to navigate. So we're going to help you navigate that specifically in Pennsylvania today as well. All righty, so the secondary transition process webinar series, we had 8 areas of focus, and this is our 8th area today. So we really have enjoyed And I have personally enjoyed doing this along with Michael, bringing you all this information. The Peel Center and NTAC has presented these webinar series since September. So again, if you've missed any of them, please go to our website and you can watch any of them that are all archived there on our website. And in addition, if we go to, as Michael will get to in a minute, we're actually going to give you a little bonus.
All righty, thanks, Diane. So as Diane mentioned, over the past 7 sessions, we presented information regarding youth self-advocacy and self-determination, the importance of understanding and engaging with outside agencies to assist with the transition process, understanding and using age-appropriate assessments for transition-age students with disabilities, how to develop the 3 post-secondary goal areas that must be addressed for all transition-age students who have IEPs. And during the last 3 sessions that we've had, we presented information on how to develop a thoughtful course of study, looking at appropriate transition services and activities, and how to develop measurable annual IEP goals that are all aligned to those 3 post-secondary goal areas of further training, employment, and independent living. As Diane mentioned, these first 3 sessions are available at the Peel Center website, and that's peelcenter.org, Transition Tuesdays, if you missed them. During today's session, we'll be presenting, as Diane mentioned, a short overview of the past 7 sessions, along with presenting information regarding the summary of academic and functional performance and the supports that are available throughout Pennsylvania to support secondary transition. And as Diane also mentioned, we added, there's a bonus, so if you've been with us, this is like a little added feature on moving to adult healthcare, or that transition process from pediatric to adult healthcare, and how that can be, you can engage outside partners in the medical field, but also in the education process. And we'll have more about that toward the end of today's webinar. So let's look at a few highlights from the last 7 sessions. We have tried to emphasize really throughout all 7 sessions the importance of engaging the young person, so that student, that youth, that young adult in this process. And it's really starting by encouraging that youth to consider and plan their dreams, their goals, what they want for the future. Having them think about where they want to live, who they want to live with, what kind of competitive integrated job they would like to do, what they want to do in their free time. If they need to go on for further training to do that particular job in that career field, what type of training does that look like? How to engage in friendships, how to have a partner someday. So all of those different areas really to help that young person think about. But also with working with the family and that young person to hold realistic but high expectations and to really see how that young person can achieve those goals that they have. It's important that we provide choices and encourage expression of preferences and ways to communicate and take into consideration cultural backgrounds, economic backgrounds in working with our students, youth, and young adults. It's also important that you feel empowered to have a voice in their IEP meetings, as well as in planning and engaging in the secondary transition process and what they're going to be doing to support themselves in the future. And then looking at what types of appropriate supports exist, what accommodations, assistive technologies that are available to support that young person in being successful with their future plan for adult life. We also talked about the importance in this process for secondary transition about interagency collaboration and really having a young person and their family have a good understanding about what outside agencies exist to support them. Later in today's webinar, we're going to go through and outline which agencies exist in a little bit more detail. We actually are going to share with you a secondary transition guide that really is a nice outline of a lot of resources in Pennsylvania. It's important that during the IEP meeting and as part of the IEP document that agency information is documented and that families have a really good understanding, as well as that young person, that student, about what role agencies can play, and not waiting until 11th grade for families to be aware of that. You know, really starting this at the start of transition or before to let folks know about the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, or OVR, or the county-based Offices of Developmental Intellectual Disabilities, the Bureaus of Autism, or the agency supports that may exist in that individual area for that young person that can assist them based on their individual needs. Family members should also really be engaged in that process to understand why it's important that you're inviting these outside folks to participate in those IEP meetings. We spent a good deal of time talking about assessment as part of this series. And it's important to note that assessment is not just one test or one point in time. It's an ongoing process. And the graphic across the top of this slide is really a nice way of talking about how assessment should occur. So first, really looking at determining what to assess based on that student's interests, their needs, where they currently are functioning, determining what stakeholders can provide information, be they within the school, so in the general education class or in the special education class, or possibly with occupation or physical or speech language therapy, what information can they provide? And then looking at outside agencies and supports, community rehabilitation providers, or through those supports that OVR may offer, or the other outside agencies. And then looking at selecting appropriate assessments, conducting them, and engaging that student in that process, and then really looking at analyzing those results, sitting down with the family and the young person and talking about those, and then utilizing that assessment data to help that student in planning for their future, looking at what courses and activities they are engaged with. It's important, again, with assessment that the family is engaged, that they know their young person, their son, their daughter's strengths, interests, goals, and needs, that the student is actively participating in this process, that that young person understands their strengths, their needs, what helps them, and what supports they may need, and really allows that young person to also ask questions. How can I be successful in this given area that I'm interested in? And looking at what the assessment says about that, if it's academic or functional areas that are being assessed. And then really looking at the other members of the team that's working with that young person and discussing what the results were and sharing that information across both within the school system and those folks that I mentioned, so the teachers, the various therapists that are working with that young person, as well as with the outside agencies.
And then as Michael was just talking about,
Turning this over to you, Diane. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Michael, you're talking about all these assessments and things, and what do we do with all that data, right? What do we do with all that information? Well, they are post-secondary goals. What are post-secondary goals? Well, it's based on all that information that you're getting from all of those assessments and the interests and the, all the different information you're getting from the family and the student themselves. Now, post-secondary goals are not the same as your IEP measurable annual goals or events that are occurring within high school. Post-secondary goals are statements that reflect what the student plans to do after high school in each of the 3 areas. And those 3 areas listed there are the post-secondary education and training, employment, and independent living. And a lot of this information is listed in 2 places in the IEP, under the present level section and in that transition grid that is on the IEP. So as we're going here, we're just trying to give you snippets of what we've been talking about. So if you want more detail of what we're of what we're describing, again, you can always go to our archived webinars. But we're just trying to give you an overview of what we've been doing over the last 8 sessions. So some considerations when you're talking about, aligning those goals and talking about goals. That family participation and the student participation is, oh, wait a minute, I'm on my wrong slide here. The considerations. There's lots of resources available. So the student goals, you want them to try to align with the skill set of the student, right? So but sometimes that might be a little difficult, and you might need to do more of a person-driven plan. And that might be another tool that you can consider when you're trying to get the assessments and thinking about goals and what does this child really need, for the future when they're leaving high school and so forth. And one of the tools that I'll personally talk about that we did for my son David was we did a lot of vision planning, and we did a lot of what's called path planning for alternatives for tomorrow's hopes. And, that really was a nice guide for us. It gave us that real day-to-day picture of David, and not only just, what his big goals are, and trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to be doing now in like 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade to get to those big goals of what he wanted to do, one of them was, he wanted to move out on his own. So we had to really look at a lot of those independent living goals. What does that really mean? What can be happening in school to prepare him to eventually live on his own as well. I also remember another friend of mine where her son he wanted to be a doctor, but a lot of times the team and different people he's not going to be a doctor. There was almost like a very negative kind of thing. But when you really look at that sometimes, when a student is sharing, something that might not sound realistic to, the team at the time, then, let's talk about that. And that's what happened with this particular family. They really started talking to the student about what is it about a doctor that you really want to do? What is it, that why would you want to be a doctor? And they gave him the information as far as what you would need to do to be a doctor, as far as how much schooling, what you need to, really study in and things like that. And as they really, talked about it and peeled the onion, so to speak, they found out he just really wanted to work in a hospital. Maybe not necessarily a doctor, but he really just wanted to work in a hospital. So that's kind of what they, were able to work on. And you really have to have those conversations and think about, what are those big goals sometimes? Are there different tools we need to be utilizing other than some of the traditional assessments and so forth that we have out there? So then, right, once you get all of that information, the assessments, the goals, and all those kinds of things, how do we then bring all of this continuation of the transition process is building up to what are these courses of study, right? What is the courses of study that we need to do to start to prepare and give the student the tools that they need? Transition continues to build. We review all of this information, and it's a coordinated set of activities that we're trying to work on together. And what's going to be useful? How is it going to be good for that student to go through and make it meaningful for them for when they do exit the school system? You need to be looking at from a school perspective, what does this child need in order to graduate? Are there different credits that they still need to be taking? Is that going to align with their goals? And really just really looking at a whole set of what's happening in transition. And just to give you an idea, when you're looking at those courses of study, here is one of the examples that we had shared with you in our previous presentation that really looks at, a particular high school student, Camilla, and she wants to obtain a job working at an airport and work toward becoming a full-time flight attendant. So when you look at this, it's really good to kind of look at the courses over a whole year, every year when you're in high school. And you can see what she is going to be working on in 9th grade and 10th grade, 11th grade. And of course, some of this will change depending if that particular class or course is still being offered that year. But at least it gives you a good picture, of where this child, Camilla, in this example, is going to be going every year. And it really helps for that planning of the transition, particularly around her courses of study. In that, we have, once you have those courses of study, then you have the section there with the transition services and activities, right? So these are the actual action steps that supports the student's movement towards those goals, okay? And sometimes some of those activities or some of the services might actually happen, in multiple years. So depending on what that might look like, because maybe every year you have a college fair, for example. A student might really benefit by attending those college fairs, maybe once or twice to really try and figure out where do they want to go to college? What do they maybe want to take up in college? Things like that. So sometimes those services and activities might look a little bit different or might be the same actually every year. One of the things that you really need to make sure of is that at least one service needs to be tied to your measurable annual goals to address, whether it's reading or writing or, whatever the student's needs are. And this is how, these transition services and activities is really how we can help a student reach their dreams. Right? When I talked earlier about David's vision and his dream, there was many things that he had on there and that we talked about. But the set of services and activities builds upon that every single year. And you want to try and structure them every year so that they are hopefully getting to that ultimate dream or goal of job or life path of whatever they're choosing. One of the IEP team should also document that at least one measurable goal has been developed for the post-secondary goal area by circling yes. So on that IEP document, there's that area where it talks about, is this actually connected to a measurable annual goal? And you circle yes. So, in our last sessions, we actually went through that and showed you that section of the IEP and so forth. So again, I would encourage anybody, if you're really looking at that, you have more questions about the goals and the transition services and activities, please go back to those webinars and maybe rehear what we had information, because we really just want to give you a snippet today of what we've been talking about. Now, this is where we kind of have shown you another example of, the services and the activities. And this is really nice because it gets to show you, just some more ideas around what an actual service could be and what does that really need to look like. So, services address the skill deficits, and it does lead to those measurable annual goals, and you have that progress monitoring to show, are they showing progress in this area? So things like building vocabulary skills, or comprehending, figurative language, or some peer interaction, initiating peer interaction, all of these different things, practicing your self-advocacy skills. Having a self-advocacy goal is really important, but there are services that you can be doing that can help that child, measure where they're going with that self-advocacy goal. That's really an important goal. I really feel a lot of times, a lot of families that I talk to, I talk to them about that, like, well, what does your child want to do? Do they know how to advocate for themselves? Do they understand their disability? Do they know, what, kind of help can I ask for? Things like that. Now, on the other side here is your activities. Now, these help students achieve their post-secondary goals, and they don't really need that measurable annual goal. So things like visiting that college or a job fair. It could be on campus at the school, or it might be actually out at that college. They have various ones. Working on that career portfolio is really important, because during this transition time, that's what you're working towards: employment goals, college goals, things like that. You need to have that career portfolio, so when they leave, they have something that they can really share with, maybe their future counselor at their college where they're attending, or maybe at a job. Senior projects is another good activity too. And here, now that's okay, you can go to the next one, because in the next slide, this kind of shows you, at each grade level, what you can be doing. Now, again, this is Camilla, who has a goal in working in an industry of a flight attendant, right? So here are some activities that she is going to be working on during each grade level. So, you know, she's going to be maybe exploring some of these careers around aviation, you know, via ONET. I know a lot of schools utilize ONET, so hopefully most of you are familiar with that. You know, and then in 10th grade, you know, maybe she's going to structure an interview with a flight attendant. So these are very specific activities for, you know, that are referring right back to that post-secondary goal that she has about possibly becoming a flight attendant. And then in 11th grade, maybe she'll job shadow somebody at an airport. And then in 12th grade, hopefully she's doing that internship at the airport. So you can see that progression of the activities specific to that goal. And speaking of goals, we talked a lot about goals, and we did do a whole section. Our last session actually was around the measurable annual goals. And sometimes this is going to look a little bit different because you are going to, this is really at the core of the student's IEP program, right? This is where you have, you know, what are they really working on? This is where the whole IEP team is assisting that student in really reaching their goals and identifying those needs and showing progress. It's really important that these measurable annual goals are really an avenue to show that progress toward that student being successful. It must provide a clear description of the skills and the student needs in order to access, participate, and make progress in the general education curriculum. Now, the student may or may not be in that general education class, but they do need to have that access to that general education curriculum in order to, you know, work on what their age-appropriate peers are doing as well. So it doesn't always have to happen within the classroom, although you would like it to be, but they do have to have access to that curriculum for that age appropriateness. And also, these relate directly to the areas of need. We talked a lot earlier about the assessments and, you know, any kind of inventories, you know, a lot of the evaluation and reevaluation that occurs. This is where you get a lot of that information around the needs of the child. It's through that reevaluation process. And that information on the IEP is at the present level section of the academic achievement and the functional performance section of the IEP. It has to relate back to those needs that were identified through those reevaluations. Measurable annual goals it must be skill building, right? So these goals must focus in that area of need, as I just mentioned, from that reevaluation process that you go through as an IEP team. Now, the full participation of the student to be able to access and actually access their curriculum, access the general education curriculum or whatever the curriculum that the child is working on. They have to have access to all of that and participating in what their goal is and what that need is so that they can participate in that goal. What are they actually going to be doing as part of that goal so that you can measure it? So you have that progress monitoring, right? So you have to be able to identify, you know, how they're going to be doing it, when they're going to be doing it, and how are they going to show progress, and when are you going to share that progress with the family as well, which is really important. And showing that progress toward their post-secondary goals, right? So that, again, that the measurable annual goals are based on that reevaluation, but they do build upon to your post-secondary goals.
Great. Thank you, Diane. That was a lot of content. I know we were summarizing.
It is a lot. I know, that's why I'm trying to cap. I want to try and give too much information, but I'm like, oh no, it's just a recap.
Exactly. So again, just to remind folks, you know, please go back. If there were any sessions that you missed or you need to recap, you can go to the PEAL website and watch any of the last sessions that we did. What we're going to do now is move on and kind of switch gears up a bit and talk a little bit about the summary of academic achievement and functional performance. And it's really that last step when we think about all this process. This is what a student and their family is provided as that student is exiting, graduating high school, leaving high school and moving on to adult life. So the summary of academic and functional performance is a requirement of the Individuals with Disabilities Act of 2004. And in IDEA 2004, they talk about the summary of academic achievement and functional performance. IDEA does not otherwise specify what information must be included in the summary of performance. However, the intent was for state and local officials to maintain the needed flexibilities in order to determine appropriate content for a student's summary of academic achievement and functional performance based on each young person, each student's individual needs, and related to their post-secondary goals. But we mention on this slide, because this is a requirement, and all LEAs in the state of Pennsylvania do need to provide a summary of academic achievement and functional performance to all students that had IEPs and who are exiting high school. So the summary of academic achievement and functional performance. There's a number of reasons why the summary of performance report is a good idea. For one thing, it can provide a type of a summative or a finalized evaluation that should lead to better transition planning. This should result in increased family and school and young person student dialogue. And it would provide a greater opportunity to continuing what that student had been doing in school as they are moving on to adult life, whether that's going on for further training, education, or engagement in competitive integrated employment, or accessing their communities and living independently. It also helps to reflect and close any gaps that might currently exist in the planning and implementation for that student's future. The summary of performance is most useful when linked with the IEP process. And what we talk about here is that if you remember back when we were talking about present education levels and that are part of the IEP, if those are very well written, the summary of academic achievement and functional performance should look a lot like that, right? Because you're talking about what the student is able to do, what they're good at, what their strengths are, what their needs are, who they need to connect with as far as outside agencies, and what activities and services they are going to afford themselves. So all that information, none of this should be new. That's in the summary of academic achievement, functional performance, but it's really truly a summary. And it's kind of like that final guide or check of the student is exiting school, either for graduating or aging out, and it's providing that nice summary of the student's abilities, skills, needs, what supports they may need, and what those ultimate goals are that they have. By providing recommendations on how to assist the student in meeting his or her post-secondary goals, the report does act as that bridge to the next steps that that student will need to take in realizing their post-secondary goals. The summary performance report should lead school folks, so teachers, educators, transition folks, to better prepare students with disabilities to become self-advocates. It serves as a means to transfer the responsibility of that attaining competitive integrated employment, engaging in post-secondary education or training, or looking at engaging in the community and looking at living in the community independently to the student and helping really to support them. And there's a link on this slide, and when you click on the link, it takes you to this page on the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, or PATN, their website. And you'll see there is this really nice document. And this was designed for families. And it's a document about understanding the summary of academic achievement and functional performance. And it walks through the document and it provides an example of what could be included in the summary of performance. So I really would highly recommend going to the PATN website and looking up this tool. And there's actually a companion document that goes with this in writing a summary of academic achievement and functional performance. So again, we really do encourage that folks check that out. So this next section that we want to move into, so we've talked in these last 7 webinars about the whole secondary transition process and how to engage. And I know we had a number of questions from folks on, well, that's great, but here in my particular area or at my school district, this doesn't seem to be happening, or we're not sure how to connect to an outside agency, or, you know, how do we know who our OVR counselor might be, or who my transition person in our school might be. So we wanted to use this section to kind of walk through not only what agency supports and what supports exist in the school, but also to touch upon some of the other projects, programs, websites, supports that exist particular to Pennsylvania that help support families and students, youth, young adults in the secondary transition process. One of the things that we wanted to mention, and it's contained on this slide, is a link to it, and this is also found on the PAC website, is a secondary transition directory. This directory is updated every year, and what it contains is a listing of all of the 29 intermediate units and who the secondary transition contact is in those facilities. And then it looks at charter schools and approved private schools, and again, that's looking at who the designated transition contacts are. In the breakdown of the intermediate units, it also lists the various school districts and who their point of contact is. And then it looks at going through the different agencies. So looking at the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, or OVR, the Bureau of Blindness and Visual Services, and then there's information there from the Department of Health, Centers for Independent Living, Career Tech Ed, local transition coordinating councils. So this guide is great. I do have to do a little disclaimer though, because the guide is put out usually in the fall. Lots of things are constantly changing. You know, as people change jobs, as roles change, as people retire. So I'm saying all that because some of the names are probably not going to be accurate, but they should at least get you in the ballpark of a phone number to call to make contact for that particular area that you're looking for. So the next thing we wanted to talk a little bit about, and we've mentioned this actually on all of our previous webinars, and it's about the transition discoveries and the Transition Quality Empowerment Project, or TQEP. And this is a project led by staff from the George Washington University in collaboration with the Peel Center and the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, or PYON. And it's sponsored through funding provided by the Pennsylvania Developmental Disability Council. Transition Discoveries is designed to work with youth with disabilities, their families, and other stakeholders to enhance secondary transition programming and services while students are in school and to increase successful students' post-school outcomes. Transition Discoveries is currently a program that is being implemented throughout Pennsylvania through the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, or PATN, and the Intermediate Unit System, along with engaging and supporting Pennsylvania's interagency partners and LEA partners, or school district partners. Included in the Transition Discoveries Guide are 9 secondary transition related areas that are broken down into 55 subcategories that can be used as a roadmap to guide the student's transition process. And we're just going to take a minute and look at that website real quickly. So the link is here. It's transitiondiscoveries.org. And for some reason, it's not cooperating, which I was afraid of. I'm not sure why that is doing that. So we're not going to fight it, I guess. We'll try it again, and it's still not doing it. Okay. All right. Trust us. It's a wonderful website. And when you go there, what you'll find are program definitions related to secondary transition. There's information regarding characteristics, outcomes, meaningful stories told by families, transition stakeholders. There's activities that can be done. There's information that can be downloaded for families. So again, highly recommend going to the website. Looks like my firewall blockers popped up for some reason. I'm not sure why that happened, but again, please check that website out. The next thing that we wanted to mention are kind of looking at the agencies and supports in Pennsylvania that support youth, young adults, and students in secondary transition. So we wanted to talk first about the Department of Education. So at the Department of Education in Pennsylvania, at the head is the Bureau of Special Education, and sometimes folks will refer to that as BSE. We mentioned that under that, you have the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, or PATN. And then you have 29 intermediate units that also offer supports to LEAs, or the school districts, to help support transition. And then you have the actual local school districts, or the LEAs, and LEAs are comprised of both school districts and charter schools. Then under the Department of Human Services, you have the Office of Developmental Programs, and that is broken into the Intellectual Disability Services, and that at the local level includes the local county mental health intellectual disability offices. And then also under the Office of Developmental Programs is the Bureau of Autism Services. And they have Autism Services Education Resource and Training, or a CERT collaborative under that group. And then we've mentioned a lot about OVR, or the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And there are offices located throughout the state of Pennsylvania, those local bureaus that are OVR offices, and also the Bureau of Blindness and Visual Services, or BVVS, is also at those same district offices. So those are kind of the support structure when you look at that. And on this next slide, we broke down a little bit, we're calling it the chain of command, but basically looking at, so in the education system, so under special education, you have in the schools teachers, transition coordinators, and or guidance counselors that help support transition. And then you usually have the special education director and or a principal. And we say and or here because each of the school districts in Pennsylvania and charter schools in Pennsylvania have a slightly different structure. However, they all do provide support for secondary transition. So again, if you're not sure who those contacts are, do please talk to your individual school districts. We mentioned on here also that there is extra support needed. So if you've talked to your school and you're having some struggles, there is something called the consult line, and you can go to there at that site, and if you're having struggles working with your particular school district, they can help you out. You can also, with any of these, contact the Appeal Center, and it's where Diane works, and they do offer support to families, and that contact information we've mentioned, we'll mention it again at the end of today's webinar. We also wanted to mention with the Office of Developmental Programs and Intellectual Disabilities, they have somebody that's called a supports coordinator, they have a supervisor, and then there's an administrative entity that oversees that. They also have a support line if you're running into some struggles with working with the Office of Developmental Programs, Intellectual Disabilities at the county level. Likewise, through the Office of Developmental Programs, Bureau of Autism Supports, they have autism supports coordinators and then regional staff, and they also have a support line. And then lastly, but not leastly, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, or OVR, they have VR counselors, VR supervisors oversee those counselors and district administrators. There are also individuals called early reach coordinators that help with school districts. If you remember back when we were talking about pre-employment transition services, or PREATs, they help in collaborating with school districts for those students that are found potentially eligible. So they're not eligible for OVR services, but they are potentially eligible, can receive services starting at age 14 to help with their transition process. And just like with the other agencies we mentioned in schools, there is something called the Client Assistance Program if you're running into some struggles in working with OVR. So Diane, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk a little bit about Transition Coordinating Council. And I think you're muted for some reason.
You're absolutely right. So I'm unmuted now. And yeah, thank you, Michael, for all that information. And as you know, we've been telling you, this is why we're doing the webinar series, because there is a lot of information around transition and how do you navigate this. And hopefully what we're giving you today is a little bit of that roadmap and where you can go to get some of that help. And one of them is the Pennsylvania Local Transition Coordinating Councils. So, you know, Pennsylvania's transition community has a rich history of helping youth and young adults successfully transition from school to adult life. In fact, Pennsylvania is recognized in many different ways at the federal level. You know, we're considered an example a lot of times We hear from the Bureau of Special Ed that, we're in the forefront of a lot of these various transition activities and the programs that we do. And, you travel to another state, there are a lot of things that do not happen in other states that happen here in Pennsylvania. So I've always been very proud of that as a Pennsylvanian, that's for sure. And I talk to other families in other states as well. And since 1990, our state has had these local transition coordinating councils, and they played a very important role in the process of guiding and what's happening during transition. There are over 50 councils, and Michael can click on this link, but again, it's taking you back to that original document that he shared, the directory. And if you go towards the end on pages, I think it's 61 and 62, you can see, there you go. Thank you, Michael. All of the transition councils in all the in the counties of where you live. So there may be one in your county, but there might not be, but maybe in a neighboring county, there would be one. And again, as our disclaimer here, that some of the people's names and phone numbers may have changed depending if they're still in that job or they shifted to a different job or whatever that might happen. But for the most part, it is, updated yearly. So at least you will have some pretty current information in there. So I think it's real important that
I'm actually glancing at some of these dates, Diane, and I'm realizing that some of these are really outdated. But I would think if you at least called the phone numbers, if not the emails, you'll at least get to some person that's the current person. Some of these folks retired before, well, I was still working in Pennsylvania, but anyhow.
Oh dear. This
will give you at least an idea if there's one in your area, exactly. And which intermediate units kind of have these connected to them.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives them an idea if there's one in their intermediate unit circle. And yeah, and it's interesting, and you can, and if you're don't have one listed there, you can always contact Patton and they can guide you as well too. So if there's I noticed when you were scrolling through, there wasn't anything for Philadelphia. So, you might have a contact person name or something like that. So what exactly is a transition coordinating council? Well, it's stakeholder input. I participated in our transition council meetings when David was in school. And, the meetings were held during the day, which sometimes is difficult for families, but, a lot of times that's what happens. So I was usually one of maybe 2 or 3 families that would attend these transition councils, but that was in my county. Another county, there are very actively, different parents that come and go over the years that do actively participate on there. But it's really good to have, cross stakeholder representation. So you have, various people from different LEAs, different roles at the intermediate unit, depending on what they're doing or assisting in transition. So it really is a good way to kind of get to know who's who in your county and what's maybe going on around transition. And they also provide support. So if you're running into a problem around transition, you can bring that concern to the table and they can, kind of brainstorm. Or if there's somebody who says, oh, well, we did that here, or we do this here, things like that. There's usually a chair at each council that, asks for ideas of maybe various topics. They bring in speakers on various topics. And as an example, I know the PO Center actually has presented at several different councils over the years, about what we provide, because we also do have a lot of youth work that we provide as well, and youth activities and leadership development, things like that. So the PO Center has been at the table at many council meetings over the years. So it's really a great way for families and for an educator. If you haven't been participating, you may want to start checking out your coordinating councils.
So this next slide, I want to talk a little bit about a collaboration that is continuing in Pennsylvania And we had mentioned a few slides ago about the Department of Education, Bureau of Special Education. So they're the folks that oversee special education programming for the LEAs, right? The school districts and charter schools in the state of Pennsylvania. And they have engaged with, it's called a Memorandum of Understanding, or an MOU, with OVR, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And there have been a series of 3 webinars that occurred this spring. And I'm going to click on this link and hopefully this one works. And it does. So this takes us to the patent website again. And this particular section is about this webinar series that occurred this spring. And it's really well done. If you haven't had a chance to watch these, I would highly recommend going to this site. There's an overview of what this Memorandum of Understanding is. And basically what it is, it's an agreement that says that starting at age 14, this is what OVR will do in working with students that have disabilities and what the education system will do. And I think the important thing to mention here too, because of how pre-employment transition services are recognized and implemented, this includes not only students that have IEPs, but also students that have 504 plans or other conditions that would have them be potentially eligible for services with OVR. So session 1 again was April 8th, and it was an overview of the MOU, and there were some really nice supporting documents that went along with that. On April 21st, there was a session on how to engage stakeholders in the IEP meeting, and this included family engagement and youth engagement, as well as the agency engagement. And I think it's important with all of this series, there was active engagement from family members, so representatives from the Peel Center, as well as UNE, the Hispanic Family Center in Pennsylvania, as well as representatives from the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network that not only presented during these webinars, were actively engaged in developing the materials that are related to each of these. So that was the April 21st session. And then May 13th, so just a few weeks ago, there was the session on aligning what is done in general education through the career education and work standards to pre-employment transition services, to then looking at post-secondary goals, services, and activities. An excellent webinar, and there are related handouts for each of these. The other thing you'll see if you scroll down on this particular part of the patent website are a series of webinars that are done that are specific to OVR, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. So they talk about how to engage with OVR, self-advocacy. There's information regarding job exploration and counseling. It actually takes the 5 required services, breaks those down. So if you go through these, and that's actually what these parts are. So there's one on self-advocacy, one on job exploration, one on workplace readiness, one on counseling for post-secondary options, one on work-based learning experiences. And then there are also, as you scroll down, information on the order of selection with OVR services. So again, a wealth of information on that particular part of the PAC website under Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And again, you can find that link right off of the PowerPoint that we have for today.
Yeah, this is something we're really excited about. Yeah, right. I know. So Michael talked earlier about, the various statewide agencies out there, right? So Peel is really excited to be sponsoring Kristen Ahrens from the Office of Developmental Programs, Shannon Austin, and these are all the bureau directors. Shannon Austin from the Office of Vocational Rehab, and Carol Clancy from the Bureau of Special Ed. And the 3 of them are going to be presenting this webinar, Working Together for Successful Transition to Adult Life. And this is on June 2nd from 2 to 4. And there is a registration link there. This is also on our website. We've been posting it everywhere. It's really a great opportunity to hear from all 3 bureau directors. And it's really, I think, going to be a very powerful webinar. So I really encourage all of you to register for this if you're available. And another upcoming event, well, actually, it's not that, it's the same upcoming event, but also doing it in Spanish on July 13th. So it's the same transition to graduation conference, but it will be in Spanish, and that'll be on July 13th. And that, again, there's a link there to participate in that.
And that's sponsored by the UNAM Family Group.
Yes,
So,
thank you, Michael. Yes, thank you. Yes, UNAM.
Sure.
And then we have the save the date of our annual Pennsylvania Transition Conference. Now, if any of you have ever talked to me, any family members ever called me before, you know the first thing I say to you, if you need to do anything in, if you need to do anything without transition, you need to attend their annual conference every year. And the other thing I always say to families is, it'll be overwhelming, but it's filled with so much great information, right? So you got to start early and go every single year. And then that way you can get all the information you need around transition. But the other key thing around their transition conference is you get to meet so many wonderful people. So here is the link. It is August 11th and 12th. And I want to encourage everybody to attend that. Even though it's going to be virtual this year, I will tell you, last year's virtual conference was phenomenal. It was almost like I was there. So.
Okay, and then we did want to suggest a few other resources. And I know we've given you a lot of resources as part of this webinar series, but I wanted to highlight a couple of these real quickly. If you go to the parenthub.org center, so this is the National Parent Resource Center. And if you go to this section on resources, it will take you to a ton of resources around not only secondary transition, but on other supports for students with disabilities. So again, the Parent Center Hub. We also wanted to mention, and I have mentioned this before, but our NTAC collaborative, our website, the new website is actually up and running, and that's what you're seeing here. And again, this truly is the central point of contact in the country regarding secondary transition, regarding resources, toolkits, one-pagers, information for youth and families. So again, please check that out. There's also a link here to the National Center for Workforce Development for Youth. And when you go to this particular site, there's a section that's called Issues. And when you click on Families, you'll notice that they have a guidepost for success, which is a framework for families on transition, as well as a couple of guides that are specific to understanding career development and supporting families in post-secondary education. But there are just a ton of other resources, not only for families, but for youth, students, as well as professionals. And then lastly, we have linked, well, let me go back, the Transition Coalition, and this is at the University of Kansas. This is also a partner with the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the Collaborative, or NTAC, the Collaborative. And one of the things I wanted to mention here, there's really good modules, including webinars, and then there are these learning modules that go into in-depth, like little mini courses on a lot of the topics that we covered in this webinar series. So again, Transition Coalition, check that one out.
And boy, Michael, we are at our time, so we're going to try and quickly finish up the rest of these slides here. Again, you know, these are just our regular reminders for you that, you know, our lives change so many different ways. And wow, didn't we see that in this last year? So, you know, just be mindful and remember that, you know, you're not in this process alone. There's lots of help. We've given you lots of resources. We ourselves are here as a resource for you as well. And please just always ask for help. Again, our bonus session that Michael talked about earlier is the move to adult healthcare. That'll be on June 22nd, which is also the fourth Tuesday in June. And my colleague Kelly King will be joining us for that session too.
And just a reminder, if you want additional information, please go to the NTAC website that I just showed you. You can also reach out to us by sending us an email at ntaccollaborative@uncc.edu. And we also have a weekly email blast, and you can sign up for that by going to our website and signing up for our weekly email blast.
All right, and we want to thank you again on behalf of the Peel Center and NTAC. And oh yes, we have another quick poll here actually. My understanding is, in addition to the regular surveys that you get after this session, there were a few other items we wanted to try and get some information from you. So if you wouldn't mind, did you learn something new? I don't know how do they actually do this, Calla? Are you able to provide that information?
They should just be able to click which circle next to either yes or no.
Okay, thank you. On the screen, they'll be able to do that?
Yep, right on the screen. We have about 44% of the people who have already completed it, so thank you so much. And we have one other question. I will just close this in about 10 seconds or so, and then we'll flip to the second question. We really appreciate everybody's feedback. Okay, and let's go to the second one. Thank you to everybody who answers the surveys as well that we send out via email on SurveyMonkey. They're very valuable. Give us another 10 seconds or so, and then we should be good to go.
All this information is really important for the Peel Center, since we are, we have grant funders that are interested in, how are we reaching families and professionals and what are they learning? So this is really good feedback for all of us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
all right, thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great day.
And we look forward to seeing you in the last session, the bonus session in June. So take care.